The mysterious encounter. Jake had always been an ordinary guy. He worked a simple job, lived in a small town, and liked to spend his weekends hiking through the dense forests near his home. There was nothing extraordinary about his life, and he liked it that way. But on this particular evening, everything was about to change. It was a cool autumn night, and Jake had decided to go for a hike just before the sun began to set. The trees were tall, their leaves turning golden and red. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled the air as Jake made his way deeper into the forest. He loved the peace that came with nature, away from the busy world. Little did he know, something unexpected was waiting for him. As he walked along the narrow trail, a strange light appeared in the sky. At first, Jake thought it was just the reflection of the setting sun through the trees. But the light grew brighter and more intense, unlike anything he had ever seen before. He stopped and looked up, squinting his eyes to try and make sense of it. The light didn't flicker like a plane's lights. It was steady and moving in a way that didn't make sense. Jake took a few cautious steps forward, his curiosity getting the best of him. The light seemed to be hovering just above the treetops, its source unclear. He kept walking toward it, hoping to find out what it was, yet feeling a sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Then suddenly, the light blinked out, leaving Jake in complete darkness. He froze. His heart raced, and the silence around him felt oppressive. He scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Only the sound of his own breathing filled his ears. Before he could move, a soft voice echoed through the trees. It wasn't loud, but it was clear and unmistakable. "You're not alone, human." Jake's breath caught in his throat. The voice wasn't coming from any person he could see. He spun around, trying to locate the source. But the forest was still, too still, as if the very air had become thick and heavy with something unknown. He called out, "Hello? Who's there?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft rustling sound came from behind a cluster of trees. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He cautiously moved forward, his feet light on the ground, every nerve in his body alert. He peered around the trees, and that's when he saw her. She was standing a few feet away, bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. Her skin shimmered with a strange light, not quite like anything Jake had ever seen before. She was tall and graceful, her hair long and flowing, almost glowing with a silvery hue. Her eyes were bright and otherworldly, a mix of blue and green, like the depths of an ocean. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Who was this person? She didn't look like anyone he had ever encountered. He had heard of legends and stories of strange creatures, but nothing like this had ever seemed real before. "Who? What are you?" Jake managed to ask, his voice trembling slightly. His mind raced with questions, but none of them seemed to make sense. How could a woman like this exist in the middle of the woods? She smiled softly, her expression calm, as though everything was perfectly normal. "I am Lyra. I come from a place far beyond your world. And I have come for you, Jake." Jake's mind whirled. She knew his name. He had never seen her before in his life. How could she know who he was? His eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was no running. He felt as if the forest itself had closed in around him. "Why? Why me?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "How do you know my name? What do you want from me?" Lyra's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him. "Our families have been watching over you for years, Jake. It is time for you to understand the truth." Jake's mind was spinning. Families. What was she talking about? He had no family out here in the woods, no one who could possibly be watching over him. Lyra continued, her voice calm and reassuring. "There is much you do not know, Jake, much that you are not yet ready to understand. But your destiny and mine are intertwined. We are bound by a connection that goes beyond time and space." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. Was this some kind of joke? Some weird prank his friends were playing on him? But no, The look in her eyes was real, and the strange glow around her was undeniable. She wasn't human. She wasn't even from this world. "What do you mean, connected?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What's happening? Why me?" Lyra looked at him with a mixture of sadness and hope. "You have been chosen, Jake. Your world and mine have been linked for a long time. And now it is time for us to meet, to join together. Our families want us to connect, human." Jake's heart raced as her words sank in. His mind couldn't make sense of what she was saying. He was just a normal guy. How could he possibly be part of something so extraordinary? Before he could ask more questions, the forest around them began to shift. The wind picked up, the trees swaying as if they were alive. And in that moment, Jake realized that his life was about to change forever. The world he knew was not the only one that existed, and this mysterious woman, Lyra, was at the center of it all. But what did she mean by connected? And why had she come for him? The answers felt like they were just out of reach. But one thing was certain: Jake's life would never be the same again. The unbelievable revelation. Jake stood frozen in place, his mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. He blinked a few times, thinking that maybe he had just imagined the glowing figure standing before him. But when he opened his eyes again, Lyra was still there, watching him with those mesmerizing eyes. There was no doubt now. This wasn't some hallucination. How do you know my name?" Jake finally managed to ask, his voice shaky. He felt like he was caught in a dream, a nightmare even, something that couldn't be real. Lyra stepped closer, her movements smooth and graceful, as if she was floating rather than walking. Her presence seemed to fill the space around them, and the strange energy in the air only heightened Jake's unease. She raised her hand slightly, as though to calm him. "You will soon understand, Jake," she said, her voice soft yet powerful, like a melody carried by the wind. "But first, you need to know who I am." Jake swallowed, trying to push down the panic building in his chest. "Who are you? What do you want from me? Why me?" Lyra's eyes softened, and she took a deep breath, as though the weight of the moment was heavy on her as well. "I am Lyra, princess of the Elysian people," she said, each word deliberate, as if carrying the weight of generations. "My people come from a distant world, far beyond the stars you can see, beyond the planets you know. We have been watching your world for centuries, waiting for the right moment to reveal ourselves." Jake's head was spinning. He had heard stories, of course, the kind people told around campfires, stories of aliens and extraterrestrial beings. But this was beyond anything he could have ever imagined. "I don't understand," Jake said, shaking his head, trying to make sense of her words. "How can this be real? I'm just a guide, Lyra. I live in a small town. I'm not special." Lyra's gaze softened even more. "Jake, you are special. Not because of what you have done, but because of what your ancestors did. You are part of something much larger, much older than you could ever realize. And your destiny is intertwined with mine." Jake felt his chest tighten, a sense of dread beginning to grow inside him. His thoughts swirled, but one question kept rising to the surface. "Why me? Out of everyone. Why are you here? Why not someone else?" Lyra seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if she was deciding how much to reveal. The glowing light around her flickered faintly, and her expression became more serious. "Because of a pact made long ago, between your ancestors and mine. A pact to ensure that when the time came, two people would be chosen to unite both our worlds. And you, Jake, are the descendant of those who made that agreement." Jake took a step back, his mind racing. "A pact? What do you mean?" "My ancestors made a pact with aliens." Lyra nodded solemnly. "Yes. Long before your people reached the stars, our ancestors saw the potential in your species. They believed that one day, humanity would rise to great heights, and they wanted to be part of that future. So a promise was made. Two beings, one from each world, would be chosen to unite the two civilizations and guide them into a new era. Jake felt like the ground was slipping beneath him. But that doesn't make sense. I've never been told anything like this. My family, my history, it's all normal. No one ever said anything about an ancient pact with alien races. Lyra stepped closer, her eyes intense but compassionate. Your people have forgotten. Over time, the knowledge of the pact was lost, but it was never forgotten by our people. For centuries, we have waited for the right time to reconnect. And that time, Jake, is now. A cold shiver ran down Jake's spine. So you're saying this is all fate? That I'm somehow destined for this? Lyra nodded once more, her voice steady. Yes, Jake. You are part of something greater than yourself. You were born for this purpose, even though you may not have realized it. The bond between our worlds, between you and me, has always existed. It is only now that you are beginning to feel it. Jake struggled to comprehend her words. His thoughts were a chaotic jumble of disbelief, fear, and curiosity. He wanted to argue, to tell her that this was insane, that there was no way he could be part of some ancient alien prophecy. But deep down, there was a flicker of something he couldn't deny, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. If this is real, Jake said slowly, then what happens now? What am I supposed to do? You've said our families want us to connect, but I don't know anything about this connection. I don't even know you. Lyra's expression softened again, and she reached out a hand toward him, her touch almost glowing with warmth. I know this is difficult to understand, Jake. I know that you've lived your whole life without knowing the truth, but I am here to guide you. I will help you understand the bond we share, and together, we will fulfill the promise made long ago. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to pull away, to reject everything she was saying, but something deep inside him wouldn't let him. There was a pull, an undeniable force drawing him toward her. It wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something he couldn't put into words. The connection she spoke of, he was starting to feel it too. I don't know what to believe anymore, Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. This is all too much. Lyra smiled, her gaze filled with understanding. You don't have to understand it all right now, Jake, but you will. In time, everything will make sense. And when it does, you'll see that this bond, this connection, is something you cannot deny. The weight of her words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. For the first time, Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast, something unimaginable. His entire life had been leading up to this moment, and even though he was terrified, there was a spark of hope in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, Lyra was right. Maybe this was his destiny. As the realization began to settle in, Jake glanced up at the sky, where the strange light had once been. The stars seemed brighter now, more distant, as if they were watching him, waiting for the next step in a story that was far beyond his understanding. But one thing was certain, the path ahead would change everything, and Jake was about to take his first step into the unknown. A binding promise. The air around them seemed to pulse with a strange energy, and for a moment, Jake wondered if his heart was racing in sync with it. Lyra's presence felt like a magnetic force drawing him in, and despite the confusion swirling in his mind, a deep part of him knew that everything was about to change. I don't understand, Jake muttered, shaking his head. How can this be real? How could my ancestors have made some kind of pact with aliens? Lyra's eyes softened, and she looked at him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his confusion. She took a step closer, and the air seemed to hum even louder, as if the very ground beneath them recognized the significance of what was about to unfold. Jake, she said gently, her voice calm and reassuring. I understand that this is overwhelming, but the truth you're struggling to accept is not something that can be ignored. The bond between our families has been hidden for a reason. For centuries, your people and mine have lived in parallel worlds, unaware of the connection we share. but the time for secrets has passed. Jake felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. But why wasn't I told any of this? Why didn't anyone ever mention anything about this bond? Lyra sighed, her expression tinged with sadness. Your people forgot. Over time, the knowledge of our connection was lost, erased, buried in the sands of history. Your ancestors, when they made the pact with mine, did so to protect both our civilizations. They believed that one day the time would come when the bond would be needed again. They didn't want it to become a burden, so they left it in the past. Jake's mind raced. He could hardly wrap his head around what she was saying. His ancestors, part of something so grand, so important. He was just an ordinary guy from a small town. But the weight of her words began to settle, like an invisible force pressing down on his chest. What exactly do you mean by the bond? Jake asked. What is it that you and I are supposed to do? Lyra's eyes darkened, and for a moment there was a flicker of something ancient, something almost unreadable in her gaze. The bond between us is not simply a connection of bloodlines, Jake. It is a bond of purpose. Our families, our peoples, are tied to the survival of both our worlds. The pact made centuries ago ensures that when the time comes, one human and one from my world, one from your world and one from mine, will unite to lead us through a time of great peril. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Lead? You're asking me to lead your people. Lyra nodded solemnly. Not just lead my people, Jake, but lead both our worlds into a new future, a future where our civilizations can prosper together. But there's a catch. This union is not without sacrifice. The bond between us will change you. It will change everything. Jake blinked, trying to process her words. You mean, I won't be the same after this? No, Lyra answered simply. You will not. The moment we join, the moment we fulfill the pact, your life will be irrevocably altered. There will be no going back. You will become a part of my world, and I will become a part of yours. We will share the same path, the same fate. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. A part of him recoiled at the thought. How could he leave everything he knew behind? He had a life, friends, family, the simple, comfortable world he had always known. But Lyra's presence, the way she spoke with such certainty, made him feel as though there was something far greater at stake here, something that went beyond personal desires or fears. He took a deep breath. What exactly are we up against? Why can't we just go back to the way things were? Lyra's expression turned serious. That is exactly what we cannot do. Your world is in danger, Jake. And so is mine. There are forces at work that neither of our civilizations can face alone. Forces that have been waiting, watching, and growing stronger. They are ready to strike. If we don't act now, everything we know will be destroyed. Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. His mind raced, and for the first time, he could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But a part of him still couldn't fully grasp the reality of it all. This wasn't just about him. It was about the survival of entire worlds. He was being asked to take on a role he had never imagined in his wildest dreams. What forces? Who's behind all this? Jake asked, his voice tinged with fear and confusion. Lyra's gaze hardened. The ones who seek to control both our worlds. They are an ancient, powerful race, one that has been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. They have no interest in peace. They want domination. And if they succeed, both our worlds will fall under their rule. Jake swallowed hard. And you think I can stop them? Lyra stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. No, Jake. It's not just about stopping them. It's about uniting both our worlds, bringing our people together to fight this threat. The bond between us is what will give us the strength to face them. Together, we are stronger than either of us could ever be alone. Jake stood in stunned silence. The enormity of what she was asking hit him like a freight train. It wasn't just about some far-off war. It was about survival. His world, her world, both of them hanging in the balance. The idea of standing up against an ancient, powerful enemy seemed impossible, but deep inside, Jake felt something stir, a sense of duty, a sense of purpose. He looked into Lyra's eyes, and for the first time, he saw something other than the mystery of her alien beauty. He saw trust, hope, and a belief that they could succeed, together. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jake said quietly, almost to himself. "You don't have to be ready, Jake," Lyra said gently. "You just have to take the first step. The rest will come as we go. But remember this, you are not alone in this fight. We are bound together by fate, by purpose, and together, we will face whatever comes." The weight of her words settled heavily on his chest. He could feel the gravity of the situation, the truth of what was at stake. This was no longer just a chance encounter with an alien princess. This was the beginning of something far bigger, something that would change the course of history. Jake took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to her. "I'll do it. I'll join you. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out." Lyra smiled, a look of relief and pride on her face. "You have made the right choice, Jake. And now, together, we will protect both our worlds." As she spoke, the bond between them seemed to flare up, a warmth spreading through Jake's chest. It wasn't just in his mind anymore. It was in his heart, his very being. He couldn't explain it, but he could feel it, deep down, in every fiber of his body. The connection was real. And now, there was no turning back. Jake had just taken the first step towards something greater than himself. And as Lyra led him forward, he knew that the journey ahead would change everything. Forever. The alien world. The journey to Lyra's world was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. The moment he agreed to join her, everything around them seemed to shift. The forest, the air, even the light. It all seemed to bend and stretch in ways that defied logic. It was as if they were walking through a veil, slipping between dimensions. Jake could feel his heart racing and his breath quickening as he struggled to process what was happening. One moment, they were standing in the familiar woods outside his home, and the next, there was no land, no familiar trees, no earth beneath his feet. It was as if they had stepped into a new reality entirely. The ground felt solid yet ethereal, and the air, it hummed with energy, a low, almost melodic vibration that seemed to resonate in his very bones. Lyra, standing beside him, was calm and composed. She didn't seem to be affected by the strange surroundings at all. Instead, she looked at him with a quiet assurance, as if she had walked this path 1,000 times before. "It's time for you to see my world, Jake. The world you've now become a part of." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling deeper into his chest. His life, everything he knew, was about to change forever. There was no turning back now. He glanced around, hoping to understand what was happening. But the scene around him was beyond anything he could have imagined. The space they were in seemed to shimmer, like the surface of a calm sea reflecting a vibrant sky. And then, out of nowhere, a vast cityscape began to materialize before them, stretching as far as the eye could see. Buildings made of translucent materials that glowed with a soft inner light, skyscrapers that seemed to grow out of the ground like trees. The air itself was filled with floating platforms, some moving slowly, others zipping by at incredible speeds. Jake's jaw dropped. This was no ordinary city. It was otherworldly, in the truest sense of the word. It was a blend of nature and technology, a place where both seemed to exist in perfect harmony. There were no sharp, metallic edges like the cities he knew. Instead, the structures here curved and spiraled, as if nature itself had designed them. "This is Elysium," Lyra said softly, her voice reverberating with pride. "My people's home. It has been built over millennia, designed to coexist with the planet's natural forces. It is a place of peace, of knowledge, of growth." Jake felt a sudden rush of awe. The city stretched before him like something from a dream. The buildings seemed to breathe, with colors shifting and flowing like liquid, adapting to the changing light. It wasn't just a city, it was alive. "I don't know what to say," Jake breathed, his voice barely audible. He had never seen anything like it. It wasn't even a city, it was an ecosystem, a living, breathing entity. Lyra smiled, a soft, knowing expression on her face. "I know it's a lot to take in. This is only the surface. Come, follow me. There's much I need to show you." Without another word, she turned and began walking toward one of the glowing pathways. Jake hesitated for a moment, looking around in awe. But then he followed her, his mind reeling from the beauty and the sheer otherness of this place. They walked through the city, and Jake couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The streets, if you could even call them streets, weren't made of concrete or asphalt. Instead, they were composed of smooth, crystalline material that shimmered in the light. The air smelled fresh, almost sweet, but with an underlying scent of something unfamiliar, something vibrant, alive. As they moved deeper into the city, Jake began to notice more unusual things. People, no, beings, moved along the pathways, but they were unlike anything he had seen before. Some were humanoid, like Lyra, but others were vastly different. There were creatures with wings, some with elongated limbs, others with features that seemed to shift and change, as if they were made of light itself. Despite their alien appearance, Jake felt no fear. There was a sense of peace here, something that calmed his nerves and made him feel as though he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "This place," Jake said, struggling to find the words. "It's beautiful. It's like nothing I've ever imagined." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. "It is, but there is more to it than beauty. Elysium is not just a city, it is the heart of our people. Everything we are, everything we do, flows from this place, and now you are part of it." They came to a large open plaza surrounded by towering trees that shimmered with a soft golden light. In the center of the plaza was a large crystalline structure, its surface reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. "This is the Nexus," Lyra explained, her voice growing more serious. "It is the core of our civilization, the place where all knowledge, all power, is stored. It is also where the bond between our worlds was first established." Jake stepped closer, drawn to the massive structure. There was something about it that seemed to pulse with energy, like a heartbeat. It was both mesmerizing and overwhelming. "What does it have to do with me?" Jake asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Lyra paused, taking a deep breath before answering. "The Nexus is where the connection between our people and your ancestors began. It is where the bond you share with me was first forged. And now, it is where you will come to understand your role in the future of both our worlds." Jake turned to face her, confusion still clouding his thoughts. "What role? What am I supposed to do?" Lyra's gaze became intense, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of something darker in her eyes, something that spoke of danger and urgency. "There are forces gathering that threaten both our worlds, Jake," she said, her voice low and filled with gravity. "Our peace, our way of life, is in jeopardy. The bond we share, the pact made by our ancestors, is the only thing that can stop them. The Nexus is where it all begins, where the strength of our connection will be tested. And you, Jake, will be the key to unlocking the power needed to save us." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He had always been an ordinary person, living a quiet life, and now he was being thrust into something that could determine the fate of two worlds. The weight of his responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders, but despite the fear, there was a flicker of something else within him, something that was starting to feel like resolve. "We will teach you what you need to know, Jake," Lyra continued. "But first, you must understand the full extent of your power. Only then will you be ready for what is to come." As she spoke, the atmosphere around them seemed to shift once again, as if the very fabric of reality was responding to her words. Jake could feel it, the immense power, the ancient energy that pulsed beneath the surface of this world. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. But there was no turning back now. Jake had made his choice, and now he would have to learn what it truly meant to be part of something much larger than himself. In this alien world, amid its beauty and its dangers, Jake's journey was just beginning, and what lay ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined. The growing threat. Jake had been in Lyra's world for what felt like days, though the passage of time here seemed warped, as if time itself had no solid grip on this place. He had explored the city, learned more about the alien people who inhabited it, and began to understand the strange, almost symbiotic relationship between nature and technology here. But as incredible as it all was, the underlying tension Lyra had hinted at lingered in the air. Something was wrong. Despite the beauty and peace of the city, there was an undeniable sense of foreboding. As Jake walked alongside Lyra one morning, he noticed a group of Elysians gathered around the central nexus. Their expressions were grim, and their voices low and urgent. Something was happening, and Jake could feel it. The pulse of danger drawing closer, like a storm on the horizon. "Lyra, what's going on?" Jake asked, his voice laced with concern. He had come to trust her, but the secrecy surrounding the gathering, the hushed conversations, left him feeling unsettled. Lyra's face grew serious as she glanced toward the group. "There's something we've been trying to keep from you, Jake. Something we couldn't explain until you were ready." Jake's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What's happening?" "There are forces, enemies, who have been watching us for years. Forces that seek to control our world, your world, and everything in between. They are not from here. They're not from any world you know. And they are growing stronger." Jake's stomach twisted. He had been told there was a threat, but hearing Lyra speak so openly about it, with such gravity, made it feel real. This wasn't just about ancient prophecies or distant battles. This was about something alive, something that could destroy everything they had worked for. "I don't understand," Jake muttered. "You said you needed me. But what does that mean in the face of these enemies? How am I supposed to help?" Lyra turned to him, her expression hardening, but her eyes filled with sorrow. "Because the enemies we face are ancient, Jake. They have been watching both our civilizations for centuries, lying in wait for the moment when we would be most vulnerable. Their time has come." Jake stood frozen for a moment, trying to absorb her words. "What do you mean? Who are they? What do they want?" "Their name is the Viraxi," Lyra replied, her voice darkening. "They are an ancient race, older than anything you can imagine. They were once part of the galaxy's ruling class, but they were banished eons ago, exiled to the forgotten corners of the universe for their insatiable hunger for power. They've been hiding in the shadows, building their strength, waiting for the right time to strike." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And now they're back. What do they want from us?" Lyra's expression was grim. "They want to dominate. They believe the universe should be ruled by only the strongest. The Viraxi have no interest in peace or unity. They want control. They want to consume, to enslave, to destroy anything that doesn't bow to them. Our worlds, both yours and mine, stand in their way." Jake could hardly comprehend what Lyra was saying. The Viraxi were no mere conquerors. They were something far worse. There was no diplomacy, no negotiation. If the Viraxi had their way, the very essence of freedom and life would be wiped away. The thought of an ancient, relentless force wiping out entire worlds was terrifying. "They've infiltrated both our worlds," Lyra continued, her voice shaking slightly with the weight of her words. "They've planted spies in our ranks, disguised as allies, slowly turning those we trust into their puppets. They're everywhere, Jake, watching, waiting, preparing for their final assault." Jake's mind raced. "How have you been able to keep it from the public? How are you keeping them from taking over?" Lyra's lips pressed into a tight line. "We've been fighting them in the shadows, using our knowledge, our technology, and our people's strength to push them back. But they are clever, patient, and relentless. We've already lost several key leaders to their influence." She paused, her eyes distant, as though recalling painful memories. "There are those who've been brainwashed by the Viraxi, who have betrayed us without even realizing it. Our only hope lies in the bond between you and me. The pact made between our ancestors was designed to unite us in the face of this threat. But that bond, Jake, must be fully realized. If we cannot unlock the full potential of our connection, we will be swept away by the Viraxi's power." Jake's heart hammered in his chest. The weight of the situation seemed to press down on him harder with each passing moment. It wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about joining Lyra's world or fulfilling some ancient prophecy. It was about survival, about stopping an unstoppable force before it could consume everything he had ever known. "But what can we do?" Jake asked, his voice shaky with the enormity of the task before him. "What can I do?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with determination and a glimmer of hope. "The Viraxi's greatest weapon is their ability to manipulate minds, to control those around them. But the bond we share, Jake, it is a force beyond their reach. Together, we have the power to disrupt their influence, to unite our people and lead them against the Viraxi." She stepped closer, her presence grounding him in the midst of the chaos swirling around them. "But it's not just about power or strength. We must awaken something within you, something that has been dormant, something tied to the ancient pact between our worlds. The Nexus holds the key. The bond you share with me, Jake, will unlock it." Jake's pulse quickened as she spoke. He could feel the weight of her words settle deeper into him. The bond, the connection between them, wasn't just about the ancient prophecy. It was the key to unlocking the strength they needed to fight the Viraxi. And he had to embrace it, to trust in it, or everything would be lost. "Okay," Jake said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I'll do it. I'll help you. Whatever it takes." Lyra smiled, the expression both proud and filled with a deep, quiet gratitude. "I knew you would, Jake. Together, we can do this. But you must understand. This fight won't be easy. The Viraxi are everywhere, and they will stop at nothing to bring our worlds to their knees." As they stood together in the heart of the city, Jake realized that everything he had known, the life he had lived, the world he had come from, was no longer enough. He had to change, had to adapt to this new reality. And as terrifying as it was, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't in this alone. Lyra was with him. And together, they would face whatever the Viraxi threw at them. But the battle was just beginning. The final stand. The days following Lyra's revelation passed in a blur. Jake had spent hours in the Nexus, delving into the deep secrets of Elysium and its people, learning everything he could about their technology, their history, and most importantly, the ancient bond that tied him to Lyra. He trained with the Elysians, learning their combat techniques, using their advanced technology, and honing the power within him that had been awakened through his connection to Lyra. It was as though a part of him that had been dormant all his life had suddenly come to life, the latent strength in his blood and mind ready to be unleashed. But as much as he trained, as much as he learned, the feeling of urgency never left him. The Viraxi were still out there, and with every passing hour, they were growing stronger. Every day, more Elysians were falling under their influence, more leaders were turning against them, and their hold on the city was growing tighter. The invasion wasn't just a matter of armies clashing. It was a psychological war. The Viraxi's ability to manipulate minds, to twist loyalty and trust, was a power unlike any other, and it was working against them. Lyra had been trying to prepare Jake for the inevitable. "The Viraxi are more than just an enemy force," she had told him one night as they sat alone in the gardens of Elysium. "They are a force that seeks to erase all hope, to break the will of those who oppose them. They will make you question everything, even yourself. But we must hold fast. Together, we can stand against them." Jake didn't know how to respond. The words were powerful, and the weight of responsibility pressing on him was heavier than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just an ordinary man. He was part of something far larger. The survival of both their worlds depended on him, and the moment of truth was fast approaching. One evening, as the sky above Elysium darkened with the approach of a storm, word came that the Viraxi had launched their final assault. Their armies had breached the outer defenses, and their forces were rapidly advancing toward the heart of the city. The battle was no longer a matter of when. It was now. The war had begun. Jake stood on the balcony of the Nexus, staring out at the horizon. The city was a living, breathing organism, but the air felt thick with dread. Even the light from the glowing towers seemed dimmer, as if the city itself sensed the coming storm. A strange energy filled the air, and the once harmonious sound of the city, of wind chimes, of the soft hum of technology, had been replaced with the tense silence of impending conflict. Lyra came up beside him, her face set in a determined expression. "It's time," she said softly. Her hand found his, and for a moment, Jake felt the full force of their bond, a connection that went beyond mere words. It was as though their very souls were intertwined, and in that moment, he knew that they were more than just two individuals. They were one force, one will, standing against an enemy that would stop at nothing to tear them apart. "We have trained, we have prepared," Lyra said, "but now it's time for you to truly embrace the power within you. The bond between us will guide us, but you must tap into something deeper than just knowledge or training. You must trust yourself. Trust the strength that lies within you." Jake looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can do this." "You are ready," she replied firmly. "You've always been ready. The moment you made the choice to stand by me, you chose this path. Now, you must walk it." Jake took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. The battle was upon them. The Viraxi were closing in, and there was no more time for doubt. He had no choice but to fight. For Lyra, for Elysium, for Earth. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the first wave of Viraxi forces arrived. The city was soon engulfed in chaos. Warships, sleek and deadly, descended from the sky, their weapons firing with terrifying precision. The air was filled with the roar of engines and the crackle of energy weapons. The Elysians scrambled to defend their homes, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. The Viraxi had come with everything they had. Lyra turned to Jake, her eyes burning with a fire that mirrored his own. "This is our moment. We must reach the Nexus before they do. We must unlock the final key." Jake nodded, his resolve hardening. They didn't have time to waste. Together, they ran through the streets of Elysium, weaving between buildings and through the glowing paths of the city. Everywhere, Elysians were fighting, using their advanced technology to defend their city, but the Viraxi were relentless. Jake could feel their presence in the air, a shadow lurking, creeping closer, the cold touch of their mind games reaching into the hearts of the defenders. As they neared the Nexus, Jake could see the dark silhouette of a Viraxi warship descending upon it. Their forces were already there, spreading out, their forms taller and more intimidating than any creature Jake had seen. The Viraxi soldiers were unlike anything he could have imagined. Tall, with armor that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, their faces covered in dark helmets. Their eyes glowed with an eerie, malevolent light. At the base of the Nexus, the battle had already begun. The Elysians were fighting bravely, but the Viraxi were too powerful. Their minds were sharp, their tactics flawless, and Jake knew that if they didn't reach the Nexus in time, all would be lost. Lyra turned to him, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We must open the Nexus now, Jake. This is the only way." Together, they rushed forward, dodging blasts and swarming Viraxi soldiers. The Nexus, once a symbol of peace and unity, was now a battleground. But as Jake approached the center, the bond between him and Lyra flared brightly, filling him with an overwhelming sense of purpose. "Now, Jake," Lyra urged. With a deep breath, Jake placed his hand on the Nexus, feeling the pulse of energy surge through him. The connection between him and Lyra seemed to fuse into one, and in that moment, he felt it. The ancient power, the strength that had been dormant for so long, awakening within him. The Nexus responded, its light intensifying, flowing like liquid fire through his veins. The bond between him and Lyra resonated, and the Nexus unlocked with a powerful burst of energy. The Viraxi forces faltered for a moment, caught off guard by the eruption of power. It was as though a barrier had been broken, and for the first time, Jake felt the full weight of the responsibility he had carried all this time. This wasn't just about survival. It was about freedom, about protecting everything that mattered. The battle raged on, but Jake stood tall. The Nexus had given him power, more than he could have ever imagined. With it, he could feel the Viraxi's influence waning, their minds no longer as strong, their control slipping. "Let's finish this," Jake said, his voice steady with newfound confidence. With Lyra by his side, they pushed forward, leading the charge. The tide of battle began to turn as the Elysians rallied, their spirits lifted by the power of the Nexus. The Viraxi forces faltered, their control over their soldiers weakening. Jake and Lyra fought with everything they had, the bond between them fueling their strength. The final stand had come, and together they would push the Viraxi back, reclaim their world, and ensure that the bond between their peoples would endure for generations to come. The eternal bond. The battlefield was still. The echoes of the last cries of the Viraxi forces slowly faded into the distant hum of the city. The once vibrant skyline of Elysium, now scarred by the war, stood in a heavy silence, as though the world itself was holding its breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, the air was calm. There were no more explosions, no more fear. The battle had been won. Jake stood amidst the wreckage, his heart still racing, his breath coming in heavy gasps. The city was in ruins, but they had succeeded. Together with Lyra, he had led the Elysians to victory. The Viraxi were defeated, their forces scattered and broken. And as the light of the Nexus faded, he realized just how much had changed. Not just in the city, but within himself. The power coursing through his veins, the bond he shared with Lyra, it had not only given them the strength to win, but it had fundamentally altered him. Jake no longer felt like the man who had hiked alone in the forests back on Earth. That person was gone. In his place stood someone who had been forged in the fires of an alien war, someone who now carried the weight of two civilizations on his shoulders. The bond between him and Lyra had done more than just unite their worlds. It had connected them in ways he couldn't fully explain. It was as though his very being had been rewritten, his soul intertwined with hers, in a way that was both profound and permanent. Lyra stood next to him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Her usual grace was still evident, but there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of the weight she had carried. The battle had taken its toll on them both, but they had come through it. Together. "We did it," Jake said quietly, still not quite believing it. "We actually did it." Lyra looked at him, her lips curving into a soft, knowing smile. "Yes, Jake, we did. And we couldn't have done it without you." He shook his head, the humility in his voice clear. "No, we did this together. You've taught me so much, Lyra. I'm not the same person I was when we first met. I never would have made it this far without you." She stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "The bond between us has always been there, Jake. You were never truly alone. And now we are stronger than we've ever been." The silence that followed felt heavier than the quiet after a storm. It was the calm after the chaos, the moment when everything settled into place. As they stood together, Jake could feel the truth of Lyra's words deep inside him. Their worlds were not just connected by a shared history. They were connected by their future. The bond between them was eternal, and it would transcend the battle they had just fought. Jake turned to look at the sky, the stars still visible through the fading smoke of the battlefield. The city around them was beginning to heal, its inhabitants emerging from the wreckage, looking to rebuild. It was a new beginning, not just for Elysium, but for both their worlds. The Viraxi had been driven back, but the future was still uncertain. The wounds of the war would take time to heal, and there would be challenges ahead. But with the Nexus at their back and the bond between him and Lyra, Jake felt a sense of hope that he had never known before. "I never imagined this," Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. "I never imagined I'd be standing here, part of something this big, a part of this world, a part of yours. It still feels surreal." Lyra's eyes softened. "I know, but this is your world now too. You are as much a part of Elysium as you are a part of Earth. And the bond we share goes beyond just us. It is a link between our peoples, a connection that will last for as long as there are stars in the sky." Jake looked at her, a strange, almost overwhelming feeling swelling inside him. This was his destiny. This was the path he had been born to walk, even if he hadn't known it until now. He wasn't just a man from Earth anymore. He was part of something greater, a bridge between two worlds, a protector of a future that was still taking shape. The realization settled into him, warm and undeniable. "Together," Jake said, meeting Lyra's gaze, "we'll make sure our worlds are safe. We'll protect them, no matter what." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with unwavering conviction. "We will. And we will never let the darkness take hold again." The two of them stood there, side by side, as the sun began to rise over the horizon. The soft glow of light broke through the clouds, casting the city in a golden hue. In that moment, the future seemed bright. Not because the battle was won, or because everything was perfect, but because they had proven something vital. That no force, no matter how powerful, could break the bond between them. Their unity was their strength, and it was stronger than anything the Viraxi, or any other enemy, could throw at them. Jake felt a wave of peace wash over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would face it with Lyra by his side. Their bond was unbreakable, and it was the key to ensuring that the future of their worlds was secure. The path ahead would be difficult, but together, they would overcome whatever came next. As the sun's rays reached the ground, the city of Elysium began to come to life. The people who had fought so hard for their homes slowly began to rebuild, their spirits lifted by the victory, and the hope that now filled the air. The war was over, but the true journey was just beginning. And with each passing day, the bond between Jake and Lyra would only grow stronger. They were no longer just two individuals from different worlds. They were something more. They were the eternal link between their civilizations, the promise of a future built on unity, strength, and the unbreakable power of their connection. The bond was not just a part of their past. It was their future, their legacy. Together, they would ensure that their worlds thrived. And together, they would stand against whatever challenges lay ahead. Forever united, forever bound.